Welcome to another deep dive. This one's all about the New Zealand weekend news update. And wow, there's a lot in here.
It is pretty packed.
Yeah, it really runs the gamut. From global worries to local stuff, a bit of economics, even some good old crime drama.
So that's a little microcosm of what's going on in New Zealand right now, isn't it? All these different pieces.
Totally. You've got everything from like a cricket legend retiring to this proposed law about foreign interference. It's all kind of swirling around.
Yeah, that new law is certainly grabbing attention, eh? 14 years in prison for leaking government secrets. That's a pretty strong stance.
Definitely sends a message.
Hmm.
Seems like New Zealand's taking the whole protecting its interests thing pretty seriously, and that feeling of vigilance, it feels even more, I don't know, timely, given that WHO warning about future pandemics, potentially worse than COVID.
Right. It's a reminder that nobody's off the hook, not even island nations. Global threats and all that.
Hmm.
But what I find kind of hopeful is that New Zealand's health experts are actually working with the WHO on pandemic preparedness.
It's not just about being reactive, then.
Exactly. It goes beyond just vaccines and treatments, too.
Yeah, I was struck by how much emphasis they're putting on healthcare worker burnout.
Yeah.
Making sure the system itself can actually handle things.
Absolutely. You need a resilient workforce if you want a resilient healthcare system.
And speaking of resilience, let's shift gears a bit to something that hits every New Zealander's wallet: the electricity market. This whole review they're doing seems to be a direct response to those power crises last winter.
It is. The government wants reliable power, but also affordable power. And those two things don't always play nice, do they?
That's the million-dollar question. How do you balance those immediate needs with the long-term picture?
Right, exactly. And speaking of tough balancing acts, there's that whole downsizing of the public sector causing quite a stir.
Over 7,000 jobs cut or proposed to be cut? That's a lot of people.
It is, especially after all that growth in the sector over the past few years. I mean, the public sector grew 34% from 2017 to 2023, and now it's facing these cuts.
Big swing in the other direction.
Yeah. And of course, people are worried about what it means for the folks who are left behind. More work, more exhaustion. And will the quality of services suffer? It's a valid concern.
Big questions for sure. The government's talking about fiscal discipline and getting money to those frontline services, but we'll see how it plays out.
It'll be interesting to watch, that's for sure.
Okay, let's take a break from the heavy stuff for a sec and talk about something that's brought a lot of national pride and maybe a few tears too. Tim Southee retiring from Test cricket.
What a career, eh? 18 years, 770 international wickets. That's top wicket taker for New Zealand. He's a true legend.
The end of an era, some might say.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, what's next for New Zealand cricket? What will his legacy be for those young players coming up?
It's a transition point, that's for sure. Celebrating those past achievements, but also looking ahead.
Absolutely.
But on a slightly less inspiring note, there's this fake police scam in Auckland. Really highlights a different side of things.
It's unnerving, isn't it? Someone posing as a police officer, conning people out of their money. Over $337,000 stolen. And who knows what kind of emotional toll that takes on the victims.
Feeling betrayed, vulnerable, it's awful. And it kind of reminds you that even amidst national celebrations, there's always that undercurrent of vulnerability.
It's a good point. It makes you
So
think.
at least the authorities are cracking down on this kind of fraud, but it's a reminder to stay vigilant, right?
Absolutely. Always a good idea.
Now, for something completely different, New Zealand just signed this agreement on trade and sustainability, or ACCTS. What's the deal with that? What should our listeners know?
Well, in a nutshell, it's about boosting New Zealand's exports, but the sustainable kind. Think wood products, wool, LED lamps, rechargeable batteries, things the world wants and that are good for the planet too.
So it's not just about what we're selling, but how.
Exactly. And there are guidelines in there to prevent things like eco-labeling being used as trade barriers, which is important for keeping things fair. Plus, there's stuff about limiting fossil fuel subsidies, a big step towards a more sustainable global economy.
Sounds promising.
It is, on paper at least. But speaking of sustainability, there's that news about NZME closing 14 community newspapers.
Yeah, that was a tough one to hear. They're blaming rising costs, profitability challenges.
It's a trend we're seeing worldwide, unfortunately. TVNZ and News Hub have had cuts recently, too. Makes you wonder about the future of local news, doesn't it? How do communities stay informed, stay connected when those sources start to disappear?
It's a big question. It's a shame, for sure. Although NZME is saying they're committed to keeping a strong presence through those regional dailies and big publications like the New Zealand Herald, so
Something to keep an eye on, definitely.
for sure. Now let's talk about something that's hitting everyone's wallets. Rent prices. The national median weekly rent is now a whopping $635, and the Bay of Plenty, they've actually overtaken Auckland as the most expensive region.
Seems the Bay of Plenty lifestyle is attracting a lot of renters, even with those higher prices. It'll be interesting to see how that affects things like migration patterns and the housing market in general.
To wrap up this section on a slightly more positive note, there's news about pharmacofunding empagliflozin, that's also known as Jardiance, for about 18,000 New Zealanders dealing with chronic heart failure.
It's good to see that commitment to improving healthcare, especially for Maori and Pacific communities who are disproportionately affected by heart failure. Access to these new treatments can make a real difference.
It's about making sure healthcare keeps up with the times, right? Offering the best options available.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think we'll take a little breather before diving into the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a quick break.
You know, while we've been chatting about all these individual stories, something pretty major happened right in the heart of New Zealand's democracy.
You're talking about Parliament.
Yeah, did you happen to catch that footage of the Haka interrupting the vote on the Treaty Principles Bill?
Oh, yeah, that was hard to miss. Not every day you see a traditional Maori war dance happening in the middle of Parliament. It definitely got people's attention.
It was a powerful moment, don't you think?
For sure. And Honorawiti Maipi Clark, the Te Pāti Maori MP who started it, she was using it to show her party's opposition to the bill, right?
That's right. It really speaks to how deeply people feel about this issue.
And it wasn't just her party either. Some opposition MPs joined in, and even people from the public gallery.
Yeah, it turned into this spontaneous show of solidarity. Really highlights how many different perspectives there are on this whole thing, you know?
Definitely. And even the speaker, Jerry Brownlee, suspending the session for a bit. That just added to the drama.
For sure. It makes you think about how dissent plays out in New Zealand's political system, right?
Yeah.
How it's managed, how it's expressed.
It'll be interesting to see if this changes anything going forward.
I think it will.
Okay, let's lighten the mood a little, shall we? Remember those 800 speed cameras we were talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it seems like those plans have been, how should we put this? Drastically scaled back.
Scaled back might be putting it mildly. They've gone from 800 cameras down to just 250.
What happened?
Seems like a combination of things.
Yeah.
Tight budgets, shifting priorities within the government.
But here's the real kicker. Even with fewer cameras, the cost per camera has doubled. They're now up to like $6 million each.
$6 million.
Yep, $6 million. How does that even work?
Well, apparently these aren't your average speed cameras. They've got all these high-tech upgrades so they can detect not just speeding, but also things like using your phone while driving.
Okay, that part actually makes sense. Cracking down on distracted driving is important, for sure. But if that's the case, why are they so expensive?
Well, there's a bit of a snag. Current laws don't actually allow them to enforce those phone detecting capabilities.
So all that fancy tech is basically useless for now.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's a case of technology getting ahead of the law.
Hopefully they can sort that out soon. Seems like a lot of money for a limited impact, you know?
Yeah, you'd think so.
Speaking of money, Inland Revenue is getting serious about collecting those overdue student loans.
Oh, yeah, they're not messing around. The amount owed is up to $2.37 billion, and a big chunk of that is from people living in Australia.
Wow. So what are they doing about it?
They've doubled the size of their team, they're working with debt collectors overseas, and they're even taking legal action in some cases, like wage deductions and arrest warrants.
Whoa, they're pulling out all the stops.
They are. And it's not just the traditional methods either. They're using social media, property data, all kinds of things to track people down.
So data's becoming a big weapon in debt collection these days, huh?
It is. It's pretty effective, too. Those overseas borrowers are definitely feeling the heat.
Do you think it'll actually make a dent in that total debt, though?
Hard to say for sure, but Inland Revenue's claiming they've seen a 50% improvement in debt recovery compared to last year. Guess we'll have to wait and see if they can keep that up.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Now, going back to our chat about the media landscape earlier, those NZME closures weren't just an isolated thing, were they?
Nope. Seems like the whole industry's having a rough time. We talked about the cuts at TVNZ and Newshub. It's not looking great, is it?
It's definitely worrying.
Yeah.
The decline of local journalism can have a real impact on communities. People are less informed, less connected. And it raises questions about media plurality, you know? Whose voices are being heard, whose stories are being told.
It's a good point. But hey, there are some bright spots, right? And NZME is still committed to those regional dailies and the New Zealand Herald, so
That's true. There's still a place for quality journalism, absolutely. And we, as news consumers, have a responsibility to support those outlets that are doing good work.
couldn't agree more. Now, before we jump into our last section, I just want to acknowledge the sheer range of topics we've covered today. Everything from global threats to local issues, serious stuff, to moments of national pride.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has. And it just shows you how all these seemingly unrelated events, when you look at them together, they actually reveal these bigger themes and anxieties that are running through society.
We see these concerns about national security happening alongside this deep desire for economic stability. We see struggles with affordable housing happening at the same time as these celebrations of sporting achievements. It's all part of the human experience, you know?
It's a reminder that things are always changing, always evolving, and that's true for the world as a whole, but especially for New Zealand.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway is just the importance of staying informed, having those thoughtful conversations, and forming our own opinions based on, a balanced understanding of what's going on.
Well said. Now, in our final segment, we're going to tackle a topic that's probably on everyone's mind, the cost of living. We'll dig into those latest trends in rental prices and what it all means for anyone trying to find affordable housing in New Zealand.
Stay tuned, folks. It's going to be an interesting one.
All right, we're back, ready to tackle the last part of our deep dive. And as promised, we're going to zero in on something that's probably top of mind for a lot of you out there, the cost of living.
It's one of those issues that just touches everything, doesn't it? And it's been all over the news lately, especially when it comes to those rising rents.
We did touch on it earlier, but let's really unpack it. The national median weekly rent is now $635. That's already a big number. But what's even crazier is that the Bay of Plenty is now more expensive than Auckland, for renters at least.
It's a shift that kind of reflects those bigger trends we've been seeing, migration patterns, changing preferences. The Bay of Plenty has this image of being a desirable place to live, a good lifestyle, and it used to be seen as more affordable, so.
But here's the thing that's confusing me. We talked about how demand for rentals is actually down and supply is up. So why are rents still going up? It doesn't make sense.
It's not quite as simple as just supply and demand, unfortunately. While more supply can eventually help to bring prices down, it doesn't happen overnight. There's a lag, It takes time for those effects to really kick in.
So there's more to this story.
Definitely. You can't ignore the overall cost of living, which has been going up steadily across the board. Inflation, interest rate hikes, and landlords have higher costs too, so they pass those on to renters.
So it's a pretty tough situation for anyone trying to find an affordable place to live, especially in places like the Bay of Plenty where demand is still so high.
It is. And it really highlights the need for some creative solutions, both in terms of actually building more houses and providing support for people who are struggling to make ends meet.
Absolutely. Now, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot today, exploring all sorts of topics that give us a glimpse into what New Zealand's dealing with right now.
From the threat of foreign interference to the potential of sustainable trade, from saying goodbye to a cricket legend to the hope that comes with new medical treatments, it's been quite a ride.
It's amazing how these seemingly random events, when you look at them together, they actually reveal these bigger themes, these anxieties that are running through society.
Yeah, there's this tension between wanting to be secure as a nation, but also wanting economic stability. There's the struggle for affordable housing happening alongside these celebrations of achievement. It's all part of what it means to be human, I guess.
It's a good reminder that things are always in flux, always changing. That's true for the world as a whole, but especially for New Zealand.
And as we finish up this deep dive, I think the most important thing to remember is just to stay informed, to keep having those conversations, and to form our own opinions based on, a good understanding of what's going on.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to chew on. We talk about how New Zealand's trying to protect itself from foreign interference, but how do you personally feel about that balance between national security and individual freedom? Is it possible to have both? Or are there always going to be trade-offs? Something to think about as you continue your own deep dives into the world around you.
Keep those minds curious, folks, and keep exploring. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the news and ideas that shape our world. Until then, thanks for listening.